Hello, and welcome to this exciting episode of FAM 254, Middle Childhood, and this is the Personality and Socioculture Development, Chapter 9. So I would say that I purposely split middle childhood for a great purpose, but it really basically came down to the amount of content on each test. I didn't want to overwhelm you on the first exam. Also, I apologize for my voice. Got some sort of weird summer cold going on in my throat, so I feel I sound a little different, so I'll just have to, please bear with me. All right, so some of the personality development that goes on here in this stage of childhood. So kids at this age are becoming more aware of other people around them, and so as a result, there are different things that go on within their personality and within their development. So first off, we have social learning is one perspective on middle childhood, and this is basically where we as kids or kids in general learn by watching other people. If you think back to your middle childhood, maybe there were some people on TV, media stars, comic book characters, or sports figures, or people that you really looked up to and try to model what you did after them. I know that as a child, a lot of my imaginary play came from different cartoons that I would watch. I know one of the earliest ones that I remember is G-Force. We used to love to kind of reenact that. There's another show called Voyagers that I used to love to pretend with my friends. These were before the days of video games and such. Things like Knight Rider or Airwolf, I know, are two other shows that my friends and I always used to like to play around with as well. And so, we would watch these shows, then we would go and act them out again. And as a result, I had an influence on our culture as children, that these were, we would adopt some of the morals and values that were presented in these shows. And so that's basically social learning. And the social learning theory is also where we kind of get that debate on violence in the media and how much that really influences how kids turn to be violent or turn towards violence as an answer for frustration and anger. Again, I think we talked a little bit about that already. Findings are mixed. So from the psychodynamic perspective, this comes mostly from Erik Erikson's work. If you recall, his work is dialectical in nature. It shows two opposing themes that children and people at different stages work toward. And so for Erikson, here in middle childhood, it's industry versus inferiority. So this is basically whether or not a child is going to learn to work hard and be productive and feel good about their productions, or if they're going to feel inferior toward their peers and feel like they produce inferior works. Obviously, we want people more on the side of an industry in this. And so, again, from that practical perspective when working with children, that's definitely the key to working with kids, is helping them feel like they can work hard and that their hard work will pay off. From cognitive development perspective, children are developing their self-concept, so who they are, what they're all about, their strengths, their abilities, talents, as well as their weaknesses. And then also their self-esteem starts becoming a little bit more relevant, or they become more aware of it during this part of childhood. By two types of self-esteem, there's basically a kind of a baseline self-esteem and a barometric self-esteem. So the baseline self-esteem is kind of the underlying feeling of how a person feels about themselves. It's really the overall perspective. The other one, I think the baseline self-esteem will make more sense in contrast to the barometric self-esteem. So with the barometric self-esteem, this is basically, some days you feel really good about yourselves. You feel like you're on top of the world and you can accomplish anything. Whereas other days you wake up and you just don't even want to get out of bed because you feel like crap. You just don't want to deal with things. It's overwhelming and you just feel completely miserable about yourself. That type of fluctuation is really normal, and that's barometric. It kind of comes and goes based on what's going on in our life, our context, or just kind of in general how we feel. Things fluctuate. But our baseline self-esteem doesn't really fluctuate that quickly. It's kind of the underlying overall feeling about ourselves. So do you feel like we're someone of value, someone of worth, or do we feel completely worthless? And where do we fall within those extremes? And that's basically that baseline self-esteem. So barometric, normal fluctuations up and down. But when we look at self-esteem, it's really more about that baseline that we're concerned about. That may, to some extent be independent of the barometric self-esteem. So even though we might feel really bad about ourselves one day, if we really stop to think about it, for those with a good, positive baseline self-esteem, they would still feel like, I know that today I feel miserable, but overall, when I'm honest with myself, I know that I'm of value and that I am worth something. So those are three perspectives from middle childhood. So social cognition also starts to happen here. Whereas before with early childhood, we start learning how to play with other kids, but a lot of times with early childhood, as we talked about, it's almost like parallel play where they look like they're engaged together, playing together, but in reality, they're kind of doing their own thing just in each other's presence. Starting in middle childhood, somewhere in that transition, they start recognizing that other people have a role to play in their lives. And so one of the first things that happens is this social inference, and it's basically perspective taking. They can start to recognize how other people are feeling, what other people are doing, and what their actions have on myself as well as my actions on other people. We also start to recognize their social regulations. These are kind of the unwritten rules of the playground. You just kind of knew that certain areas of the playground were for some people, and there were different rules that you had to act accordingly within within those guidelines as a child, or you'd get reprimanded by your peers. And so, no one really explains these rules to you necessarily. As you start middle childhood, your older grades don't set you down on the playground to kind of explain what you do and what you don't do. Just kind of something that everybody knows. It's definitely one of those unwritten things. And that carries outside of the peer group as well. If you think about your families, you probably had some unwritten rules within your families that everybody just kind of understood, but no one ever really talked about. For example, sometimes I'll talk about my family of origin, and we had this unwritten rule that you had to be that you had to have a very strong stomach if you were going to eat dinner with us, because we would talk about everything from the volume and consistency of my niece's most recent bowel movement, all the way into sex and sexuality. Any topic was open at our dinner table. My grandmother had a very weak stomach and hated eating dinner with us because we could make her sick pretty quickly. So that's just kind of our family. Growing up, it was just one of those unwritten rules. I remember one of my friends eating dinner with us one time, and he was pretty surprised about the topics that we would cover. So if you think about your family of origin, you probably had similar things as well, and probably still carry them over even today. So into moral development then, if we're becoming more aware of people around us, and our own social world, then at the same time, we're going to have to start developing morals and values as we interact with other people, guiding principles that help us know how to act around other people as well as when we're alone. So young children, according to Piaget, and if you think about very concrete thinking with moral realism, that everything is either right or wrong, and that rules are absolute. If you break a rule, it doesn't matter for what reason, you're going to get a punishment for it. That every action has a consequence to it, that's either good or bad. And so when parents lay out a rule, it's absolute. It's either going to be broken or kept. As children move into middle childhood, they start recognizing moral relativism, which is that sometimes people who create the rules change the rules, depending on the situation and the context. And I think as we move into Kohlberg's perspective, which was definitely influenced by Piaget, that'll make a little bit more sense. But here as adults, we know that right and wrong is not necessarily absolute, but it definitely depends on a context. For example, if I were to ask all of you, how many of you would say that murder is wrong? Killing somebody is wrong. All of you would probably say, yeah, it's wrong. You shouldn't do it. At least I hope you would say that. But then if you think about it, there are situations where we believe that it's probably okay to do so. For example, self-defense. If somebody's coming at you wanting to kill you, most of us would probably say that you definitely have the right to defend yourself at all costs, and that may result in the other person's life. And in that case, we would say that killing somebody is okay. So there definitely is a relativism that we have with our morals and values. And in middle childhood, we start to recognize some of those things as well. So moving then into Kohlberg, he had several different levels of moral development. So the first one that we'll cover, pre-conventional reasoning, external rewards and punishments. So if you think about Piaget's moral realism, this level is very similar to that. That there is a right and a wrong response based on the rules from authority figures, and we are going to be held accountable for that. It doesn't matter the reasoning behind it. If you steal, you're going to get punished. If you tell the truth, you're going to be rewarded type things, unless you get punished because you're telling the truth about something you did wrong. And then it gets into a whole other level of complication with parents. I don't know if any of you had that experience with your guardians growing up. Level one, again, there's that real black and white type thinking. Level two, where conform to the expectations of others. So really, it becomes more of a social awareness type thing, where our behavior and our moral perspective is going to be based on what we think other people want. So it starts loosening up a little bit and becomes a little bit more relative here, that we recognize that sometimes, this is what people expect from us. And so that's what we're going to do. And then finally, post-conventional reasoning. At some point, probably more toward older childhood, early adolescence, maybe even mid-adolescence, we start recognizing that as people, as humans, as individuals, we can develop our own set of rules of what is right and what is wrong. And we can recognize that other people might believe something differently, but we start to recognize that there's a context and a set of values placed on our morals. As we talked about just a few moments ago, that most of us would agree that killing somebody is wrong, yet based on a value system, we know that there are exceptions to those rules. And so it's really kind of based on your individual judgment on what's right and what's wrong. All right, so friends, we talked about earlier that friendships take on a different role for kids in middle childhood than they do in early childhood. So some of the things, we start seeing kids confide in each other in this age. I remember in my middle childhood hanging out at my friend's house, and we'd sit in his room and listen to Bon Jovi. And, we would talk about some of the things that we were struggling with in school. He went to a private school. I went to our neighborhood elementary school. And, we would talk about some of the different things going on at school, some of the different things we were struggling with, being the bullies and, the teachers and how scary they were and things like that. So friendships take on a different role, a lot more maturity. And if you think about it, it's really kind of laying the groundwork for the friendships that are going to be developed in adolescence and then later on in adulthood as well. Other functions of friendships to learn social concepts. Again, these are some of those unwritten rules again, how we behave around each other, what we can and can't do within our peer groups. Friends can also be a source of self-esteem. Hopefully our friends make us feel valued and make us feel like we're of worth regardless. So, when we have a very miserable day and we can confide in our friends, and if they're very validating toward that, that's definitely going to raise our self-esteem. Reinforce group norms, and then also self-expression. Sometimes we can pick peer groups that, we can experiment around with our identities and the way we want to express ourselves. And peer groups it can be a way of doing that depending on their supportive, or maybe we're going to bounce around from peer group to peer group in order to express ourselves differently. I know that, this is early adolescence, but around the time of starting middle school, I really kind of had a flush of friends and, kind of switched my peer group up quite a bit within my early adolescence, late childhood. Just, I think, more for self-expression than anything else. But kids can do that at an earlier age, and that's, one of the functions of friends. So Selman has these different stages of friendship development, based on these different age categories. So, from infant to the age of 6, it's really based on physical, geographic factors. So basically, whoever our parents are friends with, hopefully they have kids, and that's who our peer group is. As we talked about earlier, it's very self-centered, not a lot of interpersonal interaction. Just a lot more of parallel play. Some are around the age of 7 to 9. We start becoming aware of other people's feelings. If you think about it from Piaget, this is where kids are really starting to be able to have perspective taking, to be able to literally see things from another person's perspective. And so that awareness influences the friendships within that age group. 9 to 12, based on genuine give and take. Friends are there to help each other, listen to each other, help each other out. I know that if I help my friend out, that he or she will help me out later on. And then from 11 on, friendship is a continuing relationship. It's stable. And around this age as well, if you could ask somebody, how do your parents see your friendship? And they would be able to take that level of abstraction and to be able to describe their friendship based on that third person. Ethnic identity also starts to develop within there. There becomes an awareness of which group you belong to, which ethnic group you belong to. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean race. This could be religion. This could be locale. If you think about, for those of you from the South, your ethnic identity of a Southerner is going to be different from somebody's identity as a Midwesterner or Westerner, East Coast, West Coast, those types of things. So really, all of that kind of plays into your personal ethnic identity, and it begins development here within middle childhood. And so you become aware of what group you belong to, and then also what it means to belong to that group. So think about some of the things that, meanings you have of the ethnic group that you belong to. Does it mean you're polite? Does it mean you're respectful? Does it mean, not in a necessarily bad way, but that you're egocentric, kind of taking or looking out for number one type perspective. So those are some of the things that it means from meanings that are derived from being in a particular ethnic group. I remember sitting in a workshop a few years ago with a therapist from New York City, and he talked about at the very beginning of his workshop that I work in New York City with a particular type of people, with this ethnic group where you are very straightforward. You don't mince words. You don't beat around the bush. You're very kind of short with people. And he said, this is how I do it. Now, if you're in a different area, tailor it to how you need. And so he went on to present his model of working, which was indeed very, very curt, very short. I don't think I've ever heard the F-bomb said so many times, or probably even at all in any workshop that I've ever attended. It was very engaging, very funny. But at the end, a poor grad student raised their hand and said, this is great what you're presenting, but this type of language and stuff just won't fly where I'm working in the South. And the presenter just went off on the guy. Didn't you hear me at the beginning? I said to tailor this to your own situation. So even locale like that really has different meanings to interaction with people, and so it's important to be aware of those things, and start to become aware of those things here within middle childhood. And then finally, family influences in middle childhood. So child interactions and relationships with the parents. The parent is still going to monitor the child's interactions. However, the parent needs to kind of loosen up their hold a little bit and allow children within middle childhood to start making more decisions on their own. So even though it might kill some parents when their kids wear mismatched socks or pants with the shirt, it's important to allow children to start having some independence in order to start making those decisions on their own. Children can be quite independent at this age. Our youngest, he's 10 right now, and he loves to cook. He's very comfortable with cutting vegetables. He's using a sharp knife as he helps cut tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, whatever it might be. And he's been that way for several years. He's been very independent in that. Just something that he enjoys doing. And, it's a self-regulated behavior. When he wants ramen noodles, he can make them himself. And who doesn't like ramen noodles, right? Greatest food on earth. Another thing that can impact children is parental stress. This can either be interparental stress, or even if one parent is stressed, that's just going to trickle out. If we think about it, from that systemic perspective, if, one part of the system is effective, it's going to trickle out into other parts of the system as well. We know that the family structure is definitely changing. We are definitely moving away from the model of the traditional family being the best and only model of family. We know that there are other types of family that can be just as functional and just as good for children as any other. So, single parenting, same-sex parenting, as well as, the traditional husband-wife parenting as well. All can work very well for kids. What really makes a difference is the amount of interparental conflict. If that can be kept to a minimum, kids are going to grow up to be very happy, well-adjusted. There are, however, stressful situations within each of these parenting types and family types. So, all of them have their pros, all of them have their cons. For example, with single parenting, the child can be very close to their single parent or single guardian, but at the same time, the single parent has to take on multiple roles, and so that can be very stressful for the parent, and that's going to leak out into the family interactions as well. Same thing with divorce. We know that divorce in and of itself isn't what hurts children. It's really that level of parental conflict that can even last after divorce as well. And it's that conflict that takes place between parents that really is going to do more psychological and emotional damage to children than divorce in and of itself. So those are some of the personality, more social aspects of middle childhood. When we pick up, we'll in the next chapter we'll be moving on from middle childhood. So have a good one.